Hey Amanda.
Hi, welcome back.
Yeah,
Part two.
Back. Part 2. So in this video, in the last video we talked a lot about the historical context of the book and the importance of the history of the Brigadistas. In this, I think we should focus a little bit more about teaching literacy. Obviously, in my Brigadista year, teaching literacy and literacy was this huge important topic for the Brigadistas. It was their whole mantra and calling to teach literacy in Cuba. So I guess I want to start with why we think that teaching literacy is important.
I think that teaching literacy is really important because especially in the modern day world, you really need to be able to read effectively to get information. For example, you have social media. That's where a lot of politics are coming from now, especially our current president, President Trump. He is posting a lot on Twitter, and if you have a Twitter account and you read his stuff, you can really get an idea of his political views. Mm-hmm. But if you can't read, you really would be left in the loop unless what you hear from TV or something. But a big section of living in the modern day life is being able to read and write and communicate. And think of how we communicate most often right now through text.
Texts and emails and Facebook.
Hardly anyone wants to talk face to face.
Yeah. And it's so important that we learn how to not only just read in general, but interpret what we're reading. Like you said about tweets, like if you don't know how to interpret something, you don't know like the background context of something, and all of that has to be achieved through literacy, through learning how to read. So I think it's really important that we teach our students and our future students how to read. I also feel like with literacy, there's just this huge amount of pride in being able to understand what you're reading and being able to think for yourself. Like we saw in the book, there was a lot of pride around literacy. Like when Luis Santana, the dad in the host family, first learned how to spell his name, I was like about to cry. He was so proud.
I was crying.
Because then he didn't have to sign with an X or with his fingerprint when he signed important documents. Then he could spell his whole name, and he said, like, I, Luis Santana, anyone that can read this will know that's who I am. And he was just so proud of himself. And his son was just as proud too. When his son learned how to spell his name, he said, now I'm just like my dad. I can spell my name whenever I need to.
Yeah, and that was one of the main motivators for the Acosta men too. Once their women started being able to read and write, and they were just still sitting outside, they eventually came in because they didn't want to be the only ones in their family that can't read or write, and the only ones that have to sign an X spot on an important document, have the document read to them. So just being able to do that on their own really motivated them to learn how to read and write, and they succeeded.
Yeah, right. So their pride was actually hurting because they weren't literate yet. So that was their motivation. They knew, like, well, if I know how to learn or how to read, then I'll have pride in myself again, and I won't be the outcast in this situation. Because it wasn't only just their women, but also Luis learned how to read and write, and he was kind of bragging about it. Well, not bragging, but just being like, look at how proud I am of myself. I know how to read and write. And first they thought it was stupid, but once everyone was on board, that really like lit a fire under them. Yeah. And then also their main exam and like the main point of it was that they could write to the leader. So they could write to Castro and make requests. And so not only were they able to, you know, express themselves by writing their name, but now they were able to actually influence their government in a way.
Yeah, because before then they weren't able to write or send letters, and they were like very far away from everyone, so there really was no way to communicate. And I don't think that they were probably heard much in their government because they were so far away. They weren't able to write or read and send letters. So maybe that was one of the main motivators why Fidel really pushed for this program, because he knew that more people would be able to have say in the government, be one people, since their main objective was communism. But I think once the oldest Acosta, the grandfather, he was really motivated by that, especially because he wanted to tell Castro that Cubans shouldn't have to go according to Spain spelling, because Spanish people are just hierarchical. They think they're so much better than the people they
South Americans.
Yeah,
that's so true. And there was just such a sense of pride when he wrote it. And then he said, I'm going to write more letters in the future, and then they're going to be even better, because I'm going to learn how to spell longer, more academic words and send it in.
Yep, and I think that another reason that literacy is so important is because once you know how to read and write, you can really seek out information for yourself. Like, you can kind of teach yourself. You can teach yourself through reading books, and that's, like, they did not have access to schools in the mountains, so they were able to access books, or they're able to access books and really educate themselves and give themselves better life, or educationally wise, than they would have before being literate.
Absolutely. Like, they were going to be able to communicate with Laura when she gets back to Havana. That's what the younger kids were so excited for, to be able to write letters back and forth to her.
Like, finally they can keep in touch.
Yeah, finally, after all this time. I'm just so floored by the amount of pride that they show for learning, and I just wonder how we as teachers can bring in that pride for literacy and that just joy in reading into our classroom.
Yeah, that's a really good question, especially considering the political atmosphere around education today. Because I really think that one of the main focuses is how this worked in the book was that it was individualized.
Yeah.
So I think that in order to really incorporate it into our classrooms, we have to differentiate between our students. And we can't really differentiate when we have 30, 40 students.
Right, like when
class.
you don't know your students, obviously you're not going to know what their individual needs are. Like in the book, Laura knew the reason the grandmother in the Acosta family wasn't taking her test was because she didn't want to hurt her husband's pride by passing before him. And so then she was able to honor that and understand, like, okay, she's going to take it eventually, but first I have to work on this person. When you have a huge classroom and you can't really sit down, you don't, physically have enough time to know your students on that level, it's going to be really hard. What were you telling me about what Betsy DeVos said about different classroom sizes?
Yeah, so Betsy DeVos, I read an article about her and how she's trying to push for bigger class sizes, so that in high school you'll have class sizes that are bigger, like as big as lectures that you might come across in a college or university setting. And she's saying that this will be better for the education of the kids, but I don't think that it's possible, because you really need that one-on-one attention with them. You really need to get to know them so that you can match material that will be engaging for them.
Especially for first-year teachers like we're going to be, and like Laura was. Like, can you imagine how hard it would have been for Laura, a first-year teacher, to differentiate between like 30 different students, let alone her own 5?
Yeah, I can't imagine, but because she was able to, she was very successful. And I think that a reason why the program worked in Cuba during this time was because the government was pushing for it. Like, the government was offering, they were giving the volunteers free education once they came back. Really pushing to better their country. Like you said earlier, they were trying to make a smarter country.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was really an incentive, as we said before, for both the students learning in the classrooms or in the mountains, and also for the Brigadistas, because they were being really highly rewarded for this. So they would get their free schooling once they got back. For a full year, they had food and clothing covered for them, so that was something their parents didn't have to worry about again for the rest of their educational careers. So that was a really big push for them. And I think in the U.S. we just need politicians rewarding and pushing for literacy in classrooms, and as teachers we need to really push for that as well and stand up for students' rights to learn.
We need politicians that care about students and not about money, because during this time, Fidel, the book makes it seem that he cared very much for his people and wanted them to be better. whereas our politicians want to change the education system to make themselves more money.
Yeah.
And they don't care if a student doesn't learn to read or write. That's their problem.
And the Brigadistas were in a lot of ways like national heroes. Like they were going to be naming hospitals and schools after the one that was murdered. And they marched in a big parade when they were done with it, and it was a really huge patriotic call in order to be a Brigadista.
They made it so Cuba was the first country with 100% literacy. That was a big thing.
Yeah, that's huge. I think that there's a lot that we can take from this book to apply to our classroom, especially as first-year teachers, seeing Laura's journey.
Yep. I really enjoyed this book a lot.
Yeah. Thank you so much for picking out such a great book for us.
Yeah, you're definitely differentiated with us.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks.